They trusted her with the future of the monarchy. They gave her power, presence, and silence. But this royal guard heard something he was never meant to, behind a closed door, in a quiet corridor. He heard Camilla planning a coup, not with soldiers, not with violence, with poison, propaganda, and patience. He heard her call the king weak, a relic, a problem to be removed, and worse. He heard her timeline, weeks, maybe days. He could have reported it, he could have buried it, but instead, he stopped it. And when the king asked who saved the crown that night, he didn't ask for recognition, he just went back to his post. Before I show you how one royal guard risked everything to expose Camilla's darkest plan, and what happened the moment the king found out, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to see wasn't rumour. It wasn't drama. It was almost the end of a 1,000-year dynasty. The evening air moved through Whitehall like something alive, cold and deliberate, pressing against the shoulders of arriving guests as they stepped from motorcades into the amber glow of Lancaster House. The building stood like a jewel box against the darkening sky, its neoclassical columns lit from within by chandeliers that had witnessed more history than most nations. Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood at the east courtyard entrance, white gloves crisp despite the bite in the air, the scarlet wool of his Coldstream Guard tunic catching light with every measured breath. His boots were polished to mirrors. His bearskin hat sat level and perfect. To every passing diplomat and minister, he was exactly what they expected. Ceremony made flesh, tradition given form. But Alistair had done 2 tours in Iraq before the dress uniform. He knew the difference between threat and theatre. And tonight felt wrong in ways he couldn't name yet. Just the same tightness at the base of his skull he'd felt outside Al Amara 30 seconds before the convoy ahead hit an IED. It wasn't the size of the reception. Lancaster House had hosted larger. It was the details, the small things that didn't match. Deliveries had arrived earlier that afternoon with no screening. 2 black vans, no plates, rolling straight past the checkpoints, with wooden crates marked only with a gold fleur-de-lis. When Alistair had stepped forward, a logistics officer waved him off without looking up. "Lady Camilla's private order, not on your list." He'd stepped back. But the seals on those crates weren't Crown standard. And anything bypassing royal catering security wasn't protocol. It was privilege overriding process. Then there were the faces. Kitchen staff rotated constantly, but tonight Alistair counted 8 unfamiliar caterers wearing lapel badges he didn't recognise. Their accents didn't match the usual spread either. One sounded Cypriot, another Northern Italian. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. What bothered him most, though, was the chain of command. Every detail of tonight's event, seating charts, security overrides, even guard assignments, had come not from Buckingham Palace or MOD liaison, but from Clarence House, from Camilla's office, and the king nowhere. Word through the ranks said he'd arrive late, something about medical prep for a scheduled address later in the week. Fatigue, they'd said, or age catching up. Alistair watched another unmarked crate get wheeled past him into the service entrance. No manifest, no dogs, no questions. Too much access for people not on the roster. And none of it, not the wine, not the whispers, not the movement behind silk curtains, carried the king's authority. Only hers. The corridors beneath Lancaster House ran like capillaries through the building's bones, narrow, dim, forgotten by everyone upstairs, sipping champagne under gold leaf ceilings. Down here, between the private cloakrooms and east courtyard exit, the air smelled of furniture polish and old velvet, and conversations happened in lowered voices that never quite reached the ballroom above. Sergeant Alistair Drummond had been assigned East Wing Patrol. Ceremonial presence, nothing tactical, no rifle drawn, no expectation of conflict. He was supposed to stand still, nod at passing diplomats, maybe escort a stray cabinet minister back toward the music. But guards weren't ornaments. Not the real ones. Not the ones like Alistair, whose instincts still ran on the rhythm of convoys and the weight of threats that never announced themselves. He rounded the corner past the library alcove and stopped. One of the old service doors stood cracked open, just an inch, maybe two. White panel, brass handle, frosted window. Normally used by staff resetting tables between courses. But the last service run had finished over an hour ago. There shouldn't be anyone in there. And from inside, voices. Alistair's boots went silent against the marble as he approached. One hand drifted instinctively toward his sidearm, not to draw, just to ground himself. He angled his body to catch sound without pressing against the door like some palace gossip. At first just murmurs, then a voice that made his spine straighten. Camilla. He won't last another winter if we manage this right. No warmth in her tone, no hesitation, just precision. The voice of someone not making conversation, but issuing orders. A man replied, older, clipped, one of her senior aides maybe. What dosage? Enough to weaken him, not enough to trace. He's already tired. People will think it's stress, age, sentimentality finally catching up. Alistair's breathing stopped. Camilla again, quieter now, but every word cutting through. We keep the doctors distracted with dignitaries, then push a quiet abdication. I'll handle the press angle, modernization, efficiency, all the words they love. And the guard? The man asked. She laughed, cold, controlled, like breaking glass wrapped in silk. They're props. Circus acts in fur hats. Half of them don't even carry live rounds anymore. I want them phased out entirely. We'll keep a token at the gates for photographs. The rest get reassigned somewhere they're actually useful. Alistair's jaw locked. He's too soft, she continued. Still believes the monarchy is fairy tale and legacy, but the world's moved on. If he won't hand it over willingly, we'll help his body decide for him. A pause. Then the final line, low and absolute. One weakened heart, one retirement announcement, and the crown becomes mine to shape. Footsteps. The rustle of expensive fabric. A phone being set down. Alistair stepped back slowly, not breathing until he reached the far end of the corridor. His pulse hammered in his ears, but his expression never changed. Years of training kept his face blank, even as his mind raced. He couldn't speak. Not yet. Not without proof. But he'd just overheard a coup. Not from a foreign state, not from some hostile power. From the Queen Consort herself. And she'd already started. Alistair didn't return to his marked position. Instead, he drifted, slow, deliberate, down the secondary corridor toward the staff annex, pausing only when he reached a marble bust of George IV. There, in the dead zone between security cameras, he reached under his sleeve cuff and pressed twice against the watch clasp sewn into his glove. A faint green blink. Passive recording engaged. Not standard Royal Guard issue. But some guards, especially those with prior intelligence rotations, carried audio redundancy tech for sensitive spaces. The protocol was discreet, almost ceremonial. No alert, no active transmission. Just time-stamped data stored locally until retrieved. Alistair straightened and resumed his route, posture perfect, face unreadable as stone. He didn't know who he could trust. If Camilla had orchestrated this, if aides were complicit, going through normal channels might only bury the evidence faster than he could surface it. Worse, it might tip her off that someone had overheard. She'd accelerate, shift tactics. He passed two kitchen staff carrying a silver dessert tray. They nodded out of habit. He barely saw them. His mind was passing risk, calculating options. He'd seen coups before, real ones, in Basra. Not the televised kind with tanks and speeches, but the quiet kind, where power shifted with stomach cramps and unexplained disappearances. Charles didn't need a bulletproof car or a body double. He needed a meal that wasn't tampered with. Alistair's boots clicked softly against mosaic tile as he re-entered the lower north hall. Through open French doors he glimpsed the ballroom, full now, glittering with ministers and aristocrats, Camilla herself holding court beneath a chandelier that had once lit Napoleon's exile negotiations. She looked regal, confident, untouchable. A footman passed, carrying a polished wine caddy. Alistair tracked the label, Chateau Margaux, 2005. Rare vintage, usually reserved for state occasions. But what caught his attention wasn't the bottle. It was the small velvet pouch clipped beside it, cylindrical, discreet. He followed at a distance, memorizing the footman's path toward the sommelier prep room beside the cellar stairs, a space not heavily guarded, not camera covered. He'd check it later. For now, he needed to act without seeming to, move through the machinery of the evening like part of it. He passed the ballroom threshold again and resumed his perimeter. Guests moved in conversational clusters. Somewhere across the chamber, a Commonwealth envoy laughed too loud. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Everything looked ordinary. And yet Alistair had just heard one of the most powerful women in Britain plot the slow-motion removal of a reigning monarch, not with violence, but with patience, with illness disguised as age. And if he didn't find hard proof, something more than whispered words behind a half-open door, the king's body would become the evidence. By then, it would be too late. The Royal Catering Annex behind Lancaster House was all gleaming counters and copper pans, staff moving with the kind of practiced urgency that made chaos look choreographed. The air smelled of rosemary and rich juice, but Alistair's focus had nothing to do with food. He'd followed the footman discreetly, just long enough to confirm the wine caddy had entered the sommelier prep chamber. Now, in full uniform and calm as ever, he drifted past the arched entryway toward the staging corridor, where imported wines were decanted before service. At the far end of the room sat a crate, chest high, black latches, flanked by two aides in grey waistcoats with no catering insignia, and stamped into the wood in gold foil just beneath a stylized crest. C.M. Camilla's monogram. Senior royals sent personal shipments to events sometimes, but this one hadn't passed through MOD security. No dogs, no clearance tags, no documentation, just quiet authority, the kind that didn't ask permission because it didn't need to. Alistair stepped forward. "This one logged yet?" One aide glanced up, expression stiff. "Private reserve, not for general use." "Protocol's still protocol," Alistair said mildly. "Need to take a look inside." The other man's reply came sharp and rehearsed. "Orders from the Queen Consort." "Not your concern, guardsman." Alistair said nothing, just filed the phrase away, "not your concern," and moved on. That's what they always said, just before something collapsed. Later, while patrolling the silver service corridor between staging kitchens and the East Ballroom entrance, he caught the sound of laughter. Low, conspiratorial. Two aides leaned over a steel prep table, whispering above a half-filled decanter of wine. One held a small vial, the other tilted the bottle. Alistair froze in the shadow of a stone column. The vial emptied into the wine like ink dissolving in water. No flourish, no drama, just a slow, dark curl, sinking into crimson. The aide swirled the decanter once, wiped the rim clean, sealed it with gold foil. It took everything in Alistair not to move. Instead, he memorized details: the pattern of the waistcoat, the shade of the cufflink, the faded tattoo, barely visible beneath a rolled sleeve. The face was unfamiliar, not in palace records, not MOD. One of Camilla's external hires. And he'd just poisoned the king's wine in plain sight. Alistair stepped forward finally, slow and firm. "Need you to hand that over for inspection." The man stiffened. "Excuse me, you heard me?" A pause, then a smirk. "Orders from the Queen Consort." "You're out of line." Alistair's jaw flexed. "So's what's in that bottle." But he didn't escalate, not yet. Not without backup, not without leverage. He let the man walk away, filing every movement into his mind, like a report being written in real time. Because now it was clear, Camilla wasn't just planning something, she was already doing it. The corridor outside the Queen's preparation suite was too quiet for an event this size. Behind frosted glass doors, Alistair could hear fabric rustling, the muted scrape of a chair leg against polished wood. No aides, no chatter, just her. He knocked once, no answer. He opened the door anyway. Camilla stood alone at the centre of the room in deep emerald silk, her reflection multiplied by 3 full-length mirrors surrounding the dressing area. Her gloved fingers adjusted a diamond thistle brooch at her collar, regal, precise, Perfect. She didn't flinch when she saw him, didn't ask why a royal guard had entered uninvited. She just raised an eyebrow. "Sergeant Drummond," she said, like greeting a footman, "surely someone else is due for your devotion." Alistair closed the door behind him. "I just came from Silver Service." Camilla turned slightly, hand still at her collar. "And?" "Watched one of your aides pour something into His Majesty's wine." "Something that didn't come from the vineyard." She gave the faintest smile. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," he said flatly. "I was 10 feet away." For a moment, neither moved. Then Camilla turned to face him fully, voice dropping to something lower, more controlled. "Do you know how many times the king has fainted this month? How many speeches he's postponed? How many treaties we've delayed because he insists on handwritten notes and moral considerations?" "That's not your call to fix," Alistair said. Her eyes flashed. "Isn't it?" She stepped forward, heels silent on carpet. "You're a relic, Sergeant. Dressed up in tradition like a wax figure at the tower. You stand there every morning like a doll in red wool while the world changes around you." He said nothing. Let her speak. "He wants to keep pretending we're still in the age of pageantry and Commonwealth loyalty. That uniforms and fairy tales matter, but I know better. I've lived in the modern world, and it's eating us alive. So your solution is poison." Alistair's voice stayed cold. "My solution," she said, stepping closer, "is a monarchy that adapts before it dies, choking on lace and sentiment." Her voice dropped further. "I'm not trying to kill him, Sergeant. I'm nudging him toward rest, toward retirement. He won't be harmed, just softened. And when the time comes to announce the transition, the public will thank us for efficiency." Alistair's hand drifted toward his belt, where his ceremonial sword hung heavy. He didn't draw it, not yet. "You call it efficiency," he said. "I call it betrayal." Camilla's face hardened like marble. "You call yourself a soldier, but you guard a door. You guard symbols. I'm trying to protect something real." "You're not protecting the monarchy," Alistair said quietly. "You're hijacking it." Her voice sharpened to a blade. "Be careful what you say next." "No," Alistair said. "You be careful, because you're not the only one who's been listening." Camilla's posture shifted, subtle, but he caught it. Not fear, contempt. And that was more dangerous than any weapon in the room. The ballroom pulsed with soft music and sharper conversation as waiters swept past columns with silver trays. Talk echoed beneath gold cornices, mingling with the rustle of silk and the low laughter of visiting ministers. At the far end, beneath a royal banner, hung between marble columns, King Charles took his seat. He moved with visible effort, slower than usual, thinner than guests remembered even from a month ago. His complexion had paled since spring. The slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his cufflink didn't go unnoticed by those watching too closely. Camilla settled beside him, face composed, lips curved in restrained warmth. She leaned toward him gently, said something that made him smile. Across the room, Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood at the perimeter, unmoving, unreadable. He hadn't drawn his weapon. He didn't need to. The wine service began. 2 staff members wheeled out the crystal decanter trolley, one of them the same man Alistair had seen in the corridor earlier, the one who'd emptied the vial. His waistcoat was different now, but not the face, not the walk. He moved confidently, like someone whose hands had never been questioned. The wine was placed directly before Charles, a crystal goblet polished once more with pristine cloth. The decanter uncorked, soft, almost reverent. Alistair took 1 step forward, then 2. By the time the man reached for the goblet, Alistair had crossed half the ballroom. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call for backup. He simply placed a gloved hand over the stem of the king's glass. "I'll need to inspect that," he said quietly. The entire table froze, every fork suspended mid-air. Even the musicians faltered. Camilla turned slowly, eyes narrowing to points. "Sergeant," she said with careful calm, "I believe you're confusing your duties with palace protocol. You are not in charge of food inspection." Alistair didn't flinch. I watched this bottle receive an unsanctioned additive 30 minutes ago. It's being poured for His Majesty. I'm invoking Section 5 of Guard Ordnance. Gives me authority to intercept consumables if there's evidence of tampering. Camilla's voice dropped colder. You're embarrassing the Crown. Alistair didn't answer. Instead, he took the goblet, stepped back, reached for the ceremonial pouring chalice nearby, a decorative vessel used during state occasions. He tipped the decanter's contents into it slowly. As wine pooled under ballroom lights, a faint shimmer surfaced. Not obvious at first glance, but unmistakable to trained eyes. A cloud, thin, oily, slow to dissipate. A ripple moved through the room like electricity. Charles looked down at the chalice, then up at Alistair. No one spoke. The music had stopped entirely, and in the silence that followed it became clear to everyone present. Something had been placed in the wine, something not meant for a toast. For a moment no one breathed. Camilla's eyes fixed on the wine, then on Alistair, her expression sharp enough to draw blood. The hall had stilled into something beyond awkwardness. This wasn't breach of etiquette. It was darker, primal. Murmurs rippled through the guests. What's in the wine? Did he say poison? Charles didn't move. His eyes, sharp despite the fatigue written into his frame, shifted between his wife and the guard standing before him. Camilla, he said softly, do you know anything about this? She straightened in her seat, regal and unflinching. Of course not. But her voice wasn't indignant. It was composed, too composed. Alistair didn't look at her. He looked at Charles. With respect, Your Majesty, I have reason to believe the decanter was tampered with on its way to your table. I intercepted the man responsible earlier tonight. He's not royal catering. He's not even cleared on staff records. Camilla's voice cracked through the air. Enough! She stood. Her tone shifted, not scandalized but electric, carrying the weight of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. You all think this is treason? She asked the room. Because one man with a sword and a god complex thinks he's seen something suspicious. She took a slow step forward, hands clasped at her waist, voice rising with each word. King Charles has served the crown with compassion, with tradition, with sentimentality, and look where it's led. Stagnation, diminishing Commonwealth support, soft diplomacy, missed reform. No one interrupted. She turned to the gathered dignitaries. I have kept this monarchy relevant while he buries it in nostalgia. While he clings to pageantry and parades, I have been preparing us for what's coming. Her voice carried now like a manifesto. The world doesn't wait for lace and loyalty. It doesn't bow to silence and duty. It demands power, adaptability. Then her gaze settled directly on Alistair. You think I'd kill him, she spat. Risk everything to remove him. Number. I'd save him from the humiliation of being remembered as the king who couldn't keep his own crown afloat. And the poison? Alistair asked, voice steady as stone. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward Charles. You won't last another year, Charles. You know it. The fatigue, the medication, the murmurs behind your back. You want to die wearing the sash and shaking hands with school children, but I want to save the monarchy before it collapses with you. Alistair stepped forward again. So you'd kill a king to get it? Camilla didn't flinch. I'd save the monarchy, she said, whatever it costs. Gasps. Chairs shifting. Silence again, final and deafening. All eyes turned to the king, waiting. Because there was no speculation left now, no whispers behind closed doors. Camilla hadn't just hinted at a coup. She'd spoken it into the crown's air. King Charles rose from his chair with a slowness that made the silence heavier. His fingers pressed briefly against the table edge, not for balance but for resolve. The gold trim of his cuff glinted beneath chandelier light as he straightened to full height, and for the first time that evening Lancaster House seemed to remember who he was. Camilla turned to him, breath shallow. The tension in her jaw flickered. Not fear, but readiness to argue her case again. This time with quieter words. She didn't get the chance. Charles spoke, low, deliberate, clear enough to cut through every whisper still hanging in the air. I loved you, he said. Not cold, not angry, just truth. I loved you because you made me laugh when everything felt heavy. I trusted you because you claimed to believe in what I was trying to preserve, not for myself, but for the institution. He glanced toward the spilled wine, then back at her. And tonight, in front of every diplomat and envoy in this hall, you told them the truth, that you saw me not as a partner, but as an obstacle. Camilla's mouth opened, but Charles lifted a single hand, the gesture of a monarch reclaiming his voice. I have lived long enough to understand ambition, but ambition that poisons its own house is not strength, it's rot. The room was still as stone. He turned toward the MOD liaison standing near the ballroom doors. Effective immediately, Charles said. Lady Camilla is to be removed from Lancaster House and placed under private royal restriction at Highgrove. She is not to issue orders. She is not to contact staff. All communication from Clarence House is suspended pending full review. Palace aides moved without hesitation. 2 royal protection officers stepped forward from shadowed columns. Camilla's eyes flicked from them back to Charles. You're making a mistake, she said, voice dropping to something almost pitiful. You're weak. You've always been weak. Charles didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the room. Let this be clear. The Crown does not protect those who act against it, even from within. One by one, aides confiscated her personal effects. Phone, access fob, press credentials. Not a single camera flashed. The photographers understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't exile dressed as ceremony. It was erasure, curated by the very institution she'd tried to hijack. Alistair remained where he stood, upright, silent. Only when Charles turned to him did he shift. The king gave him a single measured nod. You reminded this room, he said softly, what it means to serve, not just to wear the uniform, but to honour it. And with that, Camilla, former queen consort, was escorted through the same doors she'd entered only hours before, not to applause, not to ceremony, to silence. The private antechamber behind Lancaster House's east wing existed in a different world from the glittering ballroom. No chandeliers here, no velvet chairs, just polished wood, old oil portraits, and silence thick enough to feel sacred. Sergeant Alistair Drummond stood at attention near the hearth, rifle now shouldered, bearskin hat removed and cradled in one gloved hand. The fire crackled low, offering little heat but enough light to cast long shadows across parquet floors. King Charles entered quietly, escorted by a single aide, who stopped just short of the door, then withdrew without a word. The king moved slowly, exhaustion creeping into his shoulders, but something else behind his eyes. Resolve, stillness, like a man who'd survived more than just an evening. He took a seat across from Alistair without ceremony. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Charles looked up, voice softer now but no less firm. You've had a long night, Sergeant. Alistair didn't break posture. I've had worse, Your Majesty. A faint smile tugged at the corner of the king's mouth. Yes, I rather imagine you have. He let that linger before continuing. When I was younger, I used to wonder whether ceremony and silence made us strong or merely blind. Tonight I was reminded that silence can carry a warning, and sometimes it's the quietest man in the room who sees the most. Alistair dipped his head slightly. I only did my duty, sir. No, Charles said. You did more. You stood between the crown and its own collapse. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't ask if it would be inconvenient. You acted. He leaned back in the chair, gaze distant. It's strange. Betrayal from within. It doesn't sound like thunder. Doesn't arrive in a tank. It walks beside you for years, calls itself loyalty, then one day decides you're the problem. Alistair said nothing, didn't need to. I've seen this monarchy through scandal and fire, Charles continued, almost to himself now, through the death of my mother, through nations rising that no longer look to us for anything more than tradition. And yet, I never thought I'd see the day where I'd have to exile my own wife for treason. He paused, then looked Alistair in the eye. You reminded me tonight that we don't survive because of our titles. We survive because of the people who refuse to look away. Alistair didn't shift, didn't break form, but his voice when it came was quiet. My duty is to the crown, sir. Always will be. Charles nodded once, then rose. The door opened again. The aide reappeared, this time carrying a sealed folio marked with the royal seal. No further instructions were spoken. Only history moved in the air now. As the king left the chamber, Alistair remained where he was, alone, uncelebrated, entirely at peace with that. Outside London moved on, unaware of how close the monarchy had come to vanishing from within its own walls. Should a royal guard have the power to step in against royalty if something seems wrong? Was King Charles right to remove Camilla quietly, or should the world have seen her fall from grace? And if you overheard a plot like this in the halls of power, would you risk everything to stop it? Let us know what you would have done. We read every single comment. If you believe some uniforms carry more than tradition, hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. We drop stories like this every single day. And if you know someone who still thinks Royal Guards are just for show, send them this video. Watch our other Royal Guard stories now appearing on your screen. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story you won't believe is true. Until then, stay sharp.